Hi y'all, welcome to my shop. I've been turning about 15 years, and in that time I've turned a few small items from dried burl scraps that have come my way. I don't consider myself a wood artist. I don't really sell large pieces at shows, so it's hard for me to justify buying a large burl that's expensive, especially when you consider shipping costs. Therefore, I don't consider myself a burl expert. I've had very little opportunity to turn green burls, because in my area a green burl generally just doesn't fall in your lap until recently. So recently I've had some experience turning larger burls, larger than this. This is a large one I've got in my shop right at the moment, but I've got a lot outside to process. So let's talk a little bit about burls. My church had to remove a number of cherry trees as part of a project for a new multi-use building. I've been intrigued by the stand of cherry trees on the side of my church for years, just wondering and hoping I have an opportunity to harvest one of them. These trees had a significantly large number of burls. So my congregation is rather small, and I'm the only wood turning in my congregation, and I'm on the building committee. As a result, I had an opportunity to get a lot of cherry burls lately. I turned some lovely madrone burl I bought to make boxes from for threaded acorn box tops. It was expensive and quite different from the cherry burl that I've been turning here recently. So I think every burl may be different. So what is a burl? How do they happen? Well, based on some limited research, I discovered that a burl, American English, or burr, British English, is a tree growth in which the grain has grown in a deformed manner. It's commonly found in the form of a rounded out growth on a tree trunk or a branch that is filled with small knots from dormant buds. Dr. Siri Robinson, a professor of wood anatomy at Oregon State University, recently did an article for American Woodturner that I got some information from. Dr. Robinson says that the exact cause of burls is unknown. She writes that they appear to be at least partially a defense mechanism by the tree to seal off wounds, like from fallen branches, or to sequester areas infected by fungi and insects. She explains that burls can occur in all trees, both hardwood and softwood, but some trees are more susceptible to burls than others. And there's also a genetic disposition which can be regionalized. And I think that speaks to why in this little clump of cherry trees, why there were so many burls. It happens to be one of these genetic dispositions of that particular stand in that area, or there were some common stresses that caused burls. I don't know why. Another expert thinks that burls don't seem to do much harm to the tree or shorten their life, which I found interesting. What makes burls so sought after is that the grain of the wood is generally twisted, contorted, and deformed, producing what's called a figure. Because burls are irregular cellular growth without a particular direction, they can be very dense. Think end grain in all directions. Let's talk a little bit about harvesting. You don't want to cut a burl off of a live tree or risk serious tree damage or death. Leave room on each side of a burl in order to be able to examine it for figure, which could go deeper than outside appearance or shape might indicate. You want to seal the wood as quickly as possible after harvesting. That means sealing on site if possible. Freshly cut wood in the back of a pickup truck going down the highway can speed drying and cracking. Here's an example of a few burls I picked up in the back of my SUV that I picked up from the church, and you notice that little clear wax container of wax emulsion that I took with me and sealed it right after I cut the burls. I've been using this wax emulsion called Anchor Seal for many years. I've got a video on that above. I've only been recently experimenting with using melted paraffin in a electric skillet. Now I'll get back to you after I have a little more experience with that. You want to be careful about sealing the wax or wax emulsion on either the spikes or the bark if you're planning on keeping that in your wood turning, such as, for example, a natural edge bowl. Drying. It's just not feasible. People say, well, how long should I let it dry? It's not feasible to dry a burl blank. The general rule of thumb is wood dries at 1 inch per year plus a year. So if you're talking about a 4-inch bowl blank, you're looking at least 5 years. And even then, the center of it, you still probably got to almost treat it a little bit like green because it's not going to be bone dry. So we seal the wood in order to reduce the cracking. It's not going to preserve it forever, or it may not. A sealer will normally do is slow down the drying and reduce the chances of cracking. So you still want to get to a burl just like you want to get to any green wood as quickly as you can. But sealing it and storing it properly can extend the life of it, maybe a few weeks, maybe a few months. One of the keys to storing wood is storing it where certainly off the ground, as shown here, and in a shaded or covered with a tarp. You definitely want to keep it away where wind is not going to be expose it and cause premature cracking. I started with a blue tarp over my outside wood stash till I got a note from the homeowners association saying I had to ditch the blue tarp, even though it was inside the fence outside my basement door, probably considerable distance from the street, but they said it could be seen from the street, so no problem. I replaced it with a camouflage one, no problem. If you're finding this video useful, please give it a thumbs up. It helps drive the YouTube algorithm and make it easier for the woodturners to find my videos.
It's easy to evaluate the cut on some burls such as this one, which is kind of a no-brainer for a bowl blank, but some of them are much more of a challenge, and I'm still struggling and learning how to do that. Here's an example of what I was going through.
Here's an example of a burl that I'm trying to evaluate which way to cut it, because I could cut it a couple of different ways. I could cut it through here, I could cut it this way, or I could cut it this way. Problem is I have a lot of bark inclusion here. This, so if this is the bottom, some of this could be included, but some of this bark is weak. This side looks solid, this side looks solid, this side looks solid. And part of it is where's the figure. If I cut it through here, I have a little bit of on one side, but not so much. I'm still trying to evaluate where the burl is, where I'm going to get the most burl in both bowls, realizing this is basically will still give me 2 6-inch bowls. And I think one of the main considerations is I need to cut it so I will be able to get a tenon on each of the blanks. So if I cut this one here, I've got a good tenon here, and I think I can get a good tenon here if I cut it this way. If I cut it this way, I could get a good tenon on the inside, but I'm not going to get a good bowl through here on the top. Okay, when I cut off just a bit more of the bad area, it became clearer that I could get a good tenon, and you can see I've got some nice burl, I got some nice figure. This is going to be the top of the bowls, this is going to be the bottom bowl. I've got ample opportunity to get a good tenon on both sides.
Insects, especially ants, I think are common when you start working with green burls, and they get everywhere and they get on you.
I've got this nice piece of cherry burl. The burl is mostly on this side, but I think I've got a little bit here. The problem, if you get sloppy with these things, putting them away when you get a bunch of them, and if you got a pith coming through it, like any other blank, you're going to get cracking at that pith, and you're liable to wind up losing a whole lot of it. So I'm fixing to process this thing and either turn it into a bowl or at least get rid of this pith and seal it better. I can't say that I have all the right answers on this one, but what I've decided to do is cut from the corner at somewhat of a bias in order to get rid of this cracking and I believe that way I can salvage more bowl blank. Now, it's possible that, you know, the grain is not centered, but because if I think enough figure in the burl in here, it's not going to make any difference, because there's going to be a lot of figure on the sides of the inside and the outside of the bowl.
And I try to save every burl scrap I can, including slicing off wafers for box inserts, scraps for birdhouse roofs. Burl scraps can be used in any number of wood turning projects, and I especially like to use the odd scraps to make roofs for little birdhouse ornaments. One trick is if you are sawing one, for example, I wanted to mark the circle on there, I think you can see that. You've got an unsupported edge, so be sure you use some type of scrap like this in order to support that cut. Otherwise, you could have this thing going like that with bad consequences. All right, let's talk a little bit about turning burls. Even though I wound up with a lot of burls, they're still precious, and I wanted to preserve every bit of it I can. So it helped me justify the purchase of a one-way coring system. Actually, someone gave me the base, and all I had to do was buy the smaller knife. And since I don't turn very large things, this still gives me an opportunity to salvage an extra bowl out of the middle. Okay, now it's gone down there deep enough where I need to go ahead and start adjusting this finger into position. This adjusted where this fits that same curve and doesn't bind. Well, that was dramatic. That blank flew 10 feet in the air, but it was undamaged. Now, there are ways you can deal with that. You can bring up tailstock support. You can tell down here there was a pitch pocket that caused that to break loose, but I should have stopped it right then and gone ahead and popped it, and I could have taken that out. But anyway, that'll give me a nice little bowl with some beautiful burl in it. Frequently on turning bowls, I'll use a woodworm screw, but woodworm screws is not always a good solution, especially if the wood is uneven or you have bark inclusion like in this piece. So in that case, you're frequently better off using a faceplate. But what I like even better than a faceplate is a faceplate ring, because it makes it it's a very strong hold, but it also allows you to lift a very, very large blank onto the lathe and just hook it over your jaw set and tighten it up without having to thread it, and that's a real plus. Another technique is drilling a hole a little bit larger than a set of pin jaws that a little over 1 inch in diameter that go into the hole and expand and hold it very securely, at least large enough that you can do the outside of the bowl and put a recess or a tenon on the bottom as you prefer.